The war was over. The world was a smoldering wreck. The battlefield was silent, save for the occasional hiss of escaping steam or the distant crackling of a fire licking at the remains of a destroyed city. Buildings lay in ruins, broken like the promises made by the corporations that had orchestrated this disaster. There was no cheering. No victory dance. Just the slow, painful whimper of civilization gasping its last breath. Amidst the wreckage, there was one figure left standing, Ethan Pierce, bio warrior, soldier of the future, and now, abandoned. He opened his eyes slowly, his enhanced vision adjusting to the dull gray light filtering through the smoky atmosphere. His body, once human, was now a patchwork of organic flesh and mechanical enhancements. Half his face was covered in scars, his skin replaced with smooth, cold metal. One arm was entirely cybernetic, the fingers capable of crushing bone, the palm capable of lifting tanks. He had been designed for one purpose: war. And now, after the war was over, he was nothing more than a discarded tool. A weapon with no war to fight. Ethan groaned as he pushed himself up, the weight of his artificial body feeling like 1,000 pounds, though he knew it wasn't. The mission had been a failure. The enemy was defeated, but not because of him. The corporation he had worked for, the one that had transformed him into this thing, had abandoned him as soon as the last shot was fired. Just like they abandoned all of us, he thought bitterly. His mind, though still sharp, was fogged by the sheer realization of what he had become, a walking weapon with no purpose, left to rot in the ashes of a war no one cared about anymore. He took in the desolate surroundings, half-formed memories bubbling up, images of comrades long gone, moments of combat now fading like ghosts. He couldn't remember how he had been abandoned, but he could guess. Once the mission ended, so did his usefulness. That was how it worked for bio-soldiers like him. Once the fight was over, you were discarded. No one cared about the soldiers, not the ones who fought with their lives on the line, not the ones who were genetically engineered to be perfect soldiers. It was a harsh reality, but it was the truth. Well, Ethan muttered to himself, his voice gravelly, as he surveyed the wreckage around him. Guess I'm on my own now. Great. Just great. He stumbled forward, his enhanced legs moving easily, despite the overwhelming feeling of dread and betrayal pressing against his chest. But even as he walked, a sense of humor crept in, as it often did when he was trying to deal with the harshness of his existence. This whole place looks like the set of a bad sci-fi movie, he said, half to himself and half to the empty sky. I half expect a post-apocalyptic tour guide to show up and charge me for the view. Ethan wasn't exactly sure where he was going. His mind was hazy, memories half forgotten, but his instincts kicked in. A part of him knew he needed to find answers about who had made him this way, why he had been abandoned, and most importantly, how to get justice for all the others like him. He kept walking. A few hours passed. The sun was setting now, casting an orange hue over the rubble, creating long, eerie shadows across the barren landscape. As the sky darkened, the silence seemed to weigh even more heavily on him. The air was thick with dust and the scent of burning metal. There were no birds. No animals. Just the lingering echo of destruction. His thoughts were interrupted when he saw a flicker of movement ahead. A figure, human, maybe, crawling through the debris, searching for something. His enhanced vision kicked in, zooming in on the person with ease. It was a woman, her face dirt-smeared and her clothes ragged. She appeared to be scavenging for supplies, but there was something else, something about the way she moved, the way she held herself, that caught his attention. She wasn't just another survivor. No, there was something more to her. Hey! Ethan called out, his voice low and commanding, though it cracked slightly, a reminder of just how much time he had spent in silence. You there? What are you doing? The woman froze. For a moment, there was silence. Then she slowly turned her head, her eyes narrowing as she regarded him. Who the hell are you? She asked, her voice wary, but also tinged with curiosity. Ethan took a few cautious steps forward, his large, cybernetic form looming over her. "Doesn't matter," he said with a smirk, his voice tinged with a dark humor. "What matters is that I'm not dead like the rest of this place. And I'm looking for answers." "Answers?" The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "There's no one left to answer your questions. The war's over. We lost." "I'm not asking about the war," Ethan replied, his tone turning more serious, though still carrying that sarcastic edge. "I'm asking about the people who turned me into this." He gestured to his body. "The ones who made me a soldier, a weapon, and then left me here like trash." The woman's expression softened slightly, though she still looked wary. "You're one of them," she said, her eyes flicking to the mechanical parts of his body. "One of the bio-soldiers. They called you enhanced, right?" Ethan's eyes hardened. "Yeah. That's what they called me. But now that I'm no use to them, I'm just abandoned. Like all the others." For a long moment, the woman said nothing. Then, after a pause, she sighed and stood up, dusting herself off. "I'm Cassie," she said, her tone resigned. "And I might know something about who did this to you." Cassie gave him a long, appraising look before nodding slowly. "All right. You're not the first one they left behind, you know." Her voice had an edge to it, as if the words carried more weight than the obvious, more unspoken layers to them. She turned and began walking in the direction of the ruined city streets. "The question is, do you even know who you're really looking for?" Ethan followed her, his heavy footsteps trailing behind. The weight of his enhanced limbs felt almost comforting now. He was a machine, after all. Or at least, that's what he had always been told. Machines didn't have feelings. They didn't get abandoned. They just did what they were programmed to do, but here he was. Abandoned. "I know exactly who I'm looking for," Ethan said. "Victor Hale. CEO of Biogen Tech. The bastard who put this all in motion." Cassie looked over her shoulder with a strange, knowing look. "You've heard the name, huh? Figures. You were probably one of his first test subjects. The original batch of bio-soldiers, enhanced and abandoned once the job was done." "Original batch?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I didn't even know there were others like me." "I thought I was the," Cassie interrupted, her tone matter-of-fact. "You're not. You were just one of the earliest experiments. They didn't stop with you. Hell, they're still making them." She glanced around as she spoke, her eyes darting to every shadow, every distant sound, as though she was listening for something more than just the remnants of the wreckage around them. "You weren't meant to be the last." Ethan felt a tightening in his chest. "You're telling me there are more." "More than you can count," she said. "But they're all out there, somewhere, left like you. Abandoned. Discarded." She didn't seem surprised by it. If anything, it sounded like she had come to expect it. "The corporation treats you like weapons. Not soldiers. Tools. You've got a job to do, and once it's over, they don't care what happens to you." "So what happens to the rest of us?" Ethan asked. "What do we do now?" Cassie's pace slowed as she led him down a narrow alley between crumbling buildings. Her eyes, hard and focused, glanced briefly toward the street where the sounds of distant engines could be heard. "That's what I've been trying to figure out for years. And that's why I'm here. To find out what the hell is going on with all of this. Why they've been experimenting, why they abandoned us, and who else is still out there." The wind whistled through the debris-strewn streets as they walked further into the heart of the ruined city. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to find any kind of peace. It looked like a war zone, but then again, it always had. Ethan could feel the tension in the air, the strange sense of waiting, like something, or someone, was always just out of sight. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. "Victor Hale doesn't care about us," Ethan muttered as they rounded a corner. "He doesn't care about anyone except himself. He used us, and now he's probably out there making more of us." "You said it yourself. We were just experiments." "Yeah," Cassie agreed, though her voice held a strange sort of bitterness. "And experiments don't matter. Not when they're done." She stopped suddenly, causing Ethan to nearly crash into her. Her eyes scanned the area as she crouched down, pulling a small device from her jacket. It was a high-tech scanner, its screen flashing with data as she worked. "What are you looking for?" Ethan asked, eyeing her movements closely. "Information," she answered, her voice low. "The corporation keeps data centers scattered around here. They probably thought they were safe, hidden away from all the destruction. But if I can access one of those servers, I might be able to find something that'll tell us exactly who's pulling the strings." "How do you even know where to look?" "Because I've been tracking them for a long time." She gave him a brief, almost amused glance. "I'm not just a scavenger, you know. I used to work for them. I know their operations. Their patterns. And if we're lucky, we might even find the people who ran the experiments on you, and shut them down for good." Ethan felt a spark of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Hope. A strange emotion for a soldier. He had been trained to shut out his feelings, to focus only on the mission, the orders, the task at hand. But here, with Cassie, things felt different. They weren't just two strangers anymore, they were two people on the same mission, fighting for something more than survival. "All right, lead the way," he said, his voice steady. They moved quickly, ducking into an old building that had once been a hub of corporate activity before the war had torn it apart. Inside, the remnants of office desks and broken computers lay scattered across the floor. Cassie moved with purpose, navigating the debris with a level of precision that suggested she had done this more times than she cared to admit. Ethan's eyes scanned the area, every step heavy with the realization that at any moment, they could be caught. "I'm in," Cassie muttered, her fingers dancing over the keys of an old terminal. The screen flickered before coming to life, casting an eerie glow over her face. "I've got access to their system. It's weak, barely operational after the attack, but it should be enough." Ethan stepped forward, standing at her side as the screen filled with encrypted files, maps, and long-lost communications. There were blueprints for more bio-enhanced soldiers, but there were also other files, ones that were clearly hidden from the public. He could see mention of Project Phoenix and Subject Zero. Each file made his stomach tighten. His mind raced. "Project Phoenix? What is this?" he asked. Cassie froze for a moment, her fingers hovering above the keyboard. Then she muttered, "It's a failed project. At least, that's what they told me. They tried to create a new generation of bio-soldiers. More powerful than you, than anything they'd ever seen." Her voice grew quieter, almost as if she was afraid of the words. "But it didn't work. Something went wrong. And they locked it all away." Ethan's fists clenched. They were creating a monster. "They weren't just creating a monster," she corrected him. "They were creating an army. The kind of soldiers who don't question orders. Soldiers who obey. Who do what they're told, without any of the messiness of emotions or morality." She clicked through another file, her face hardening. "And you know what else? They were working on it right up until the war ended. Those files are fresh. Hale's planning something. Something big." Ethan's mind swirled with the possibilities. Was he just another failed experiment in a long line of failures? Or had he been part of something far darker? "Then we need to find Hale," Ethan said, his voice firm with resolve. "We need to stop him." Cassie nodded, her expression grim. "I've got a plan. But it's not going to be easy. They stood there in the dim light of the ruined building, the quiet hum of the ancient terminal the only sound between them. Ethan felt his pulse quicken, a strange energy filling him, an energy that had been buried beneath the years of war, beneath the cold metal and synthetic parts that made up his body. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had something worth fighting for. "I'll do whatever it takes," Ethan said, meeting her gaze. Cassie smiled, though it was brief and tinged with uncertainty. "Then let's finish this." Cassie's fingers danced across the ancient terminal's keys as she worked to decrypt the files. Every second that passed felt heavier to Ethan, each beat of his enhanced heart bringing him closer to understanding what had happened to him, and to the world that had betrayed him. As the screen flickered and hummed, Cassie muttered to herself, frustration and determination flickering in her voice. Come on," she whispered, tapping a few more keys. "The encryption's better than I thought." Ethan kept his focus sharp, scanning the dimly lit room, knowing that time was against them. They couldn't afford to be discovered. Every shadow in the corner felt like a potential threat, and his instincts, honed by years of military service, screamed at him to stay vigilant. But there was something else, something far deeper at play here. He wasn't just trying to uncover his past anymore, he was digging into a world that had written him off. And that world didn't play fair. "Got it," Cassie said suddenly, her voice low but triumphant. "It's a long shot, but this might lead us straight to Hale." Ethan stepped closer, looking at the screen as the data began to pour in. Maps. Schematics. Coordinates. Everything they needed to track down Victor Hale and put an end to his twisted experiments. "Where is he?" Ethan asked, his voice barely more than a growl. Cassie scanned the data, then froze. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, Ethan thought she might say something that would send them into a new direction. Something that would change everything. "New York," she said softly. "Hale's been hiding in plain sight. His operations are based out of a compound just outside the city. It's isolated, heavily guarded, and it's not just a corporate headquarters. It's something much darker." Ethan didn't hesitate. "We go there now." Cassie gave him a cautious look. "It's not going to be that simple. This place is a fortress. We need a plan, not a death wish." "Then give me the plan," he said, his voice cold. "I've been a soldier my whole life. I know how to fight. I'll get us in." "Yeah, you're definitely good at fighting," Cassie replied, the faintest trace of humor touching her voice, though there was still a weight of concern behind it. "But it's not just about getting in. It's about surviving long enough to get to Hale. I know this world, Ethan. I know what they can do." He looked at her. "And I know what I can do." Her lips pressed into a thin line as she studied him for a long moment, as though deciding whether to argue further. But then, with a deep sigh, she nodded. "All right, then. But we do this my way." Without waiting for him to respond, Cassie gathered the data on a portable drive, stowing it in her bag. She turned to him, motioning for him to follow her. They moved through the building's shattered remnants, ducking low, avoiding detection as they made their way out into the heart of the ruined city. The sun was setting again, casting long shadows across the wreckage. The quiet of the streets felt more oppressive now, as if the silence had teeth. It was a stark reminder that the war hadn't just destroyed buildings, it had broken the fabric of society. The few survivors left clung to whatever scraps of hope they could find, and the rest? Well, they'd been forgotten long ago. They moved swiftly, weaving through alleyways and avoiding patrols of scavengers, the occasional group of survivors who eyed them warily but kept their distance. It was an uneasy truce in a world where humanity had turned on itself. As they neared the outskirts of the city, Cassie glanced over at Ethan, her expression hard but resolute. "We'll need a vehicle. Something low profile, fast. I know where to find one." Ethan's gaze was fixed straight ahead, his mind already racing through the plan, piecing together the necessary steps. "I'll take care of the muscle. You focus on the tech. Get us to that compound. She nodded, and without another word, they picked up the pace. Within minutes, they arrived at an old vehicle depot, a forgotten corner of the city where the last remnants of the old world lay hidden. Cassie led him to a rusted-out van, its exterior beaten up but still functional. She climbed into the driver's seat, firing up the engine with surprising ease. The low hum of the motor was a welcome sound, one that reminded Ethan that there were still things in this world that worked. He climbed into the passenger seat, his cybernetic body easily fitting into the cramped space. He didn't need to speak, his presence beside her was enough of an agreement. They were partners in this, whether they liked it or not. As Cassie drove, the streets grew emptier, the buildings taller and more imposing. The further they traveled, the more the weight of their mission settled over him. They were about to confront a man who had caused untold suffering, a man who had treated people like tools, discarding them the moment they were no longer useful. Victor Hale had built this empire on the backs of soldiers like Ethan, soldiers who had been manipulated and abused. And now, they were going to bring it all crashing down. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about proving that even discarded tools could break free. The van rumbled through the quiet outskirts of the city, passing checkpoints that had once been used to control the flow of refugees, soldiers, and civilians. Now, they were mostly abandoned, their original purpose forgotten in the wake of the war. But Hale's compound loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the backdrop of the setting sun. Cassie slowed the van, taking a sharp turn onto a narrow road that led up a hill. The compound was perched at the top, surrounded by a high, impenetrable fence. Watchtowers, guard dogs, automated sentries, everything about it screamed danger. It was a fortress, and getting inside would require more than just muscle. "We need to disable the perimeter defenses," Cassie said, her voice calm but with an edge of urgency. "There's a terminal on the north side of the compound. If I can hack into it, I can lower the security grid long enough for us to slip in unnoticed." Ethan gave her a grim smile. "I'll keep the dogs busy." "Just don't get yourself killed," Cassie muttered under her breath, but Ethan could see the faintest trace of admiration in her eyes. They parked the van a safe distance away, hidden in the shadows. As they moved closer to the compound, Ethan felt his pulse quicken. This was it. The final step. The moment he would face Hale and demand answers. They reached the northern side of the compound, where Cassie set to work on the terminal. She plugged in the drive, her fingers moving quickly over the keys. Ethan stood guard, his enhanced senses picking up every sound, every movement. His heart rate had slowed, his mind focused entirely on the task ahead. This was what he was made for. Cassie's voice broke through his thoughts. "I'm in. The grid's down for the next few minutes. We've got a window." Without hesitation, Ethan moved, his powerful limbs carrying him swiftly over the fence. He landed silently on the other side, quickly scanning the area. The compound was a labyrinth of concrete and steel, a maze designed to keep intruders out. But it was no match for him. They moved through the darkened hallways, Cassie leading the way with the drive still clutched tightly in her hand. They passed security rooms, armed guards, and armed sentries, but Ethan's stealth and agility allowed them to slip by unnoticed. Then, finally, they reached the heart of the compound, Victor Hale's office. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him. He knew what awaited inside. But it didn't matter anymore. This was his purpose now. To destroy the man who had made him. The door to Victor Hale's office loomed before them, a thick metal barrier that separated Ethan and Cassie from the man responsible for everything that had happened to them. Ethan felt the weight of the moment in his chest, every inch of him attuned to the task at hand. They had come this far. There was no turning back now. Cassie's fingers hovered near the control panel beside the door. Her eyes darted across the screen, fingers moving quickly, typing in a series of codes that Ethan couldn't begin to follow. The seconds dragged, stretching into what felt like minutes. His heart was steady, but his mind raced through every possibility. Every backup plan. Every contingency. The door clicked. Ethan didn't wait for her to confirm. He stepped forward, his enhanced body moving with quiet precision, slipping into the room like a shadow. Cassie followed just behind him, her breath catching in her throat as they entered. The office was grander than anything Ethan could have imagined, a mix of polished glass, sleek steel, and cold, sterile surfaces that reflected an ambition as ruthless as its creator. And there, behind the desk, sitting with the kind of smug self-assurance that only someone like Victor Hale could possess, was the man himself. Victor Hale was everything Ethan had imagined, and more. Tall, with sharp features and a perfectly tailored suit that screamed power. His face was the picture of control, like a puppet master who'd pulled every string in the world. But it was the eyes that caught Ethan's attention, cold, calculating eyes that never seemed to blink, eyes that had seen thousands of people as nothing more than tools. He didn't flinch when they entered. Didn't even stand. So, the soldiers finally come home, Hale said, his voice smooth like oil, but laced with an unmistakable sneer. Did you finally run out of orders, Pierce? Or did you just get tired of being an experiment? Ethan's hand tightened into a fist, the servos in his cybernetic arm whirring softly as the muscles in his real hand tensed. I'm not here to talk about experiments, Hale. I'm here to make you pay. Hale raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. Make me pay? How quaint. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers in front of his face. Do you really think you can take me down? You? You were just a tool, Pierce. A weapon created to serve a purpose. And now that purpose is over. You should be thanking me for what I gave you. But instead, here you are, wasting my time. Ethan's voice was like steel. You're the one who's wasting time. This ends tonight. For all of us. The silence in the room felt like it could break at any moment. Hale chuckled lightly, a sound devoid of warmth or humor. You really think you're in control here? You've always been a tool, Pierce. And you always will be. You never had a choice. That's where you're wrong, Ethan said, his voice hard. I always had a choice. You just never gave me one. Hale's expression faltered for the briefest second, and in that moment, Ethan could see the cracks beneath the man's facade. His eyes darted toward the security terminal in the corner, the one Cassie had hacked just moments before. Ethan could feel the tension in the air, the weight of every decision coming to a head. You think your little rebellion's going to change anything? Hale asked, though there was a nervous edge creeping into his voice now. You've seen the world out there. There's nothing left to save. The people? They're too weak. The war was just a prelude. The real plan is in motion now. You mean the new generation of soldiers, Cassie interjected, her voice calm but laced with disdain. She stepped forward, holding up the drive she'd carried with her, the one that contained all the stolen data. The ones you've been creating in secret. The ones you've been using to keep the world in line. But you've made a mistake, Hale. The world isn't just about weapons anymore. People like us, we're not just tools. We're people. Hale's face twisted into something between disbelief and rage. He shot up from his chair, his fist slamming down onto the desk. You think they'll follow you? You think they'll do what you say? His voice was a snarl now, low and dangerous. They were made to obey. No one has a choice anymore. Ethan moved faster than Hale could react. In a flash, he crossed the room, grabbing the man by the throat and lifting him off the ground with ease. Hale's feet dangled inches above the polished floor as Ethan's grip tightened. The room seemed to shrink, the air thick with the tension of their confrontation. You were right about one thing, Ethan growled, his face inches from Hale's. I was a tool. But not anymore. He dropped Hale with a force that made the man stumble backward, gasping for breath. And you're not getting away with this. Not this time. Victor Hale staggered to his feet, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. You're a failure, Pierce, he spat, wiping blood from his lip. You always were. And you always will be. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was clear. They were done. Hale's empire of cruelty, built on the backs of soldiers who had been used and discarded, was coming to an end. Cassie, who had been standing silently to the side, finally spoke up again, her voice cold and unwavering. We have what we need. Your reign ends now. Hale looked from Ethan to Cassie, his eyes flickering with desperation. You can't just walk away. You don't understand what I've built. This is bigger than you. You'll never, you're nothing, Ethan interrupted. His voice was quiet now, almost contemplative, as though he had shed every ounce of his past life, every lie they had told him. You're a man who built an empire on pain. And I'm the one who's going to tear it down. The door burst open, and a squad of guards rushed in, weapons raised, but they hesitated when they saw Ethan. They had been programmed, conditioned, and controlled. But now? Now, they saw the truth about Hale, the truth about themselves. The room filled with the sharp sound of clattering weapons as the guards slowly lowered their guns, the realization dawning on them that they had been used just like Ethan. They weren't enemies anymore. They were victims of a system built on manipulation. Hale's face turned red with rage. You think you've won? You're nothing. You always were. Ethan turned his back to Hale, his voice carrying an authority that hadn't been there before. You can keep talking, Hale, but it's over. You don't get to control us anymore. Without another word, he walked toward the door, Cassie by his side. The guards made no move to stop them. The revolution had already begun. The compound would fall. Hale would fall. And for the first time, Ethan Pierce felt the freedom that had been stolen from him. It wasn't just about destroying an empire. It was about building a future. A future where people like him, people who had been discarded, could stand tall. The light from the setting sun shone through the cracks in the broken windows of the compound as Ethan stepped outside, his body no longer a tool but a man. And with every step, the world outside, battered, broken, and still searching for hope, felt a little less dark. They had won and the fight was just beginning.